going live. It says we're live.
We
I
are
know there's a little
live.
lag on YouTube, so I'm gonna connect there real quick and make sure that we are live.
Okay. Coming to you live from Seattle.
Cool. It looks like we're up.
Okay.
And if anyone
You can
wants to
actually
in the live chat, you
see.
can make sure that you can put in the chat if you can hear us and see us. It looks like we're up. So
Yeah, I think so.
might wait a minute while people are joining in here. How's everyone doing? Again, you can talk in the live chat on YouTube. There's also a link to our community Slack in the description if you want to stay connected. We're just going to wait a minute, and then I think we're going to dive in to our event. Got some tea.
I do have some tea. I always have tea.
What are you drinking?
It's an espresso maple.
Oh, that's
from Trader Joe's. Espresso maple black tea, actually.
Mine is chai tea.
Yum. You do a good spicy chai.
All right. Looks like we're live. We got some people here. I'm going to do a quick introduction. So hello, everyone. Welcome to the Robust and Responsible AI community, also known as R² AI. We're a community of AI and machine learning practitioners, researchers, designers, and much more. We've actually been around for several years doing events in Seattle and virtually, but we've been on a little bit of a hiatus, so I'm excited to be back. You can stay connected with us in the Slack channel. The link is in the description, and we're planning to do a lot of cool stuff this year, so I hope you'll join us at some events. And if you want to do an event, if you want to come on and do a talk like this or a presentation or some sort of workshop, reach out to me. My name is Sage Elliott. I'll be the host for today's event, and you can kind of think of it as a live podcast, so I'll be interviewing guests starting with a specific topic. We should have some time for questions at the end, but I encourage you to post in the chat throughout the conversation and connect with each other on Slack. I know one thing I really miss about live events is connecting with people and learning what they're working on. So I found Slack is one of the best ways to do that virtually. And again, if you'd like to come in for an event, let me know on Slack or LinkedIn, or you can do a talk request in the description below. With that, I want to... we have Jay on today. He's here to talk about real-world applications of generative deep learning and NeRFs, or NeRF. I actually forget if there's ever an S for plural of them. I never see it written out, but I hear that's how people talk about it. So with that, Jay, could you give an introduction and a little bit about your background?
Yeah, oh my gosh. So I come from a pretty wide arrangement of background experience. So I started out in video game design, studied that for a couple of years coming out of school. And I then made a jump over to the military. So I was in the Marine Corps for a time. I studied Persian Farsi there. I was a signals intelligence analyst, so did a lot with communications and radio telemetry type stuff for a while, and then made my way to Seattle and got into the tech industry here. That was kind of my goal coming out of the military. So I actually bumped into Sage at a startup that we ended up working at for a couple of years, I think, for you, but I was there for about a year. Got let go. And I always have this joke that it was like the best thing that ever happened to me when I got laid off. Because
sometimes that's what happens, you know?
Yeah, well, startup things happen. We lost some funding, lost a bunch of people. I got laid off and I went to a software boot camp. And then that kind of careened me into this whole line of doing different startups, consulting and doing front-end web development, moved more into UX design and engineering, and then did some work at creative and design agencies, doing different kinds of work, and then started working at a VR nonprofit called Virtual World Society. And there we were sort of building a community-focused platform that was going to try to bring together all these independent creators and researchers that wouldn't normally have had channels outside of academia, or just would have been isolated in their own communities, and try to connect them together within this whole space of XR or metaverse now technologies. So that was kind of over the past few years. I had a ton of different jobs that not really worth going into all the details, but I'm now working at a a startup that is focused entirely on trying to help people bring 2D content images into the 3D realm. Put briefly, I'm sure we can talk about that more later.
That's really cool, and it's interesting. Like you mentioned, you kind of started with game design. How many years ago was that?
Oh my God. That was 18, 19 years old and 20. So yeah, it would have been like over a decade now.
That's awesome. So it's fun to see the like you started in that field, and then you've had all these different jobs and careers and stuff you've been working on in between, and
Mhm.
now you're kind of not that you're designing a game, but I think there's a lot of overlap in kind of creating kind of the 3D assets and stuff that can be used in games and all these other things that I'm sure we'll dive into later. But that's really
Yeah,
fun. It's a
yeah.
fun journey.
Yeah, it is, and the fact that you say that it really has continued to come back because like game design is all about experience. Like it's about designing something for a person to go and play and shaping it in a way where you have a particular goal in mind of like how you want them to move through the space or do the thing. And that has continued to come back in everything because it's like if you're designing a website, that's exactly what the problem you're trying to solve. It's just in a 2D space. If you're building a VR experience, it's the same problem except with way more dimensions of complexity. And if you're trying to make a podcast, you're figuring out storytelling around the narrative that you want to build. So like, I don't know, it all comes back to that same skill set to me.
That's a cool way to look at it.
Yeah.
So the topic that we have that we're going to start today is kind of generative deep learning in general, and then I'm sure we're going to go more into the 3D space and hear more about what you're working on. But just to get us started, so there's so many areas that we could dive into. I don't know if you have a favorite area kind of in the generative deep learning space, but maybe if anyone is super new, maybe we could briefly kind of describe a generative deep learning use case or what it could be used for, kind of like the general field.
Yeah, yeah. And I think starting point there is the way that I think about it at a very high level is a lot of these generative machine learning algorithms have tended to be some sort of algorithm model, a statistical learning model that is creating something, it's generating some sort of information, and then there is some sort of secondary model, at least for GANs or the adversarial networks, that actually looks at the output of the original and says, yes, that's exactly what I'm looking for, or no, go back and do it again. Um, and so it's like it always seems like a very teacher-student relationship, and the student is learning how to create the thing better. So it's like this whole class of models that are really interesting. I think we've had a ton of conversations around these just because you're literally using machine learning to create something. So it like gets right at the heart of what we think people are unique for, which is being able to generate new ideas or new things from scratch, which is why I love that whole space.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting. There's a whole thing of like that pops in my head now when I think about this, and I go on these like Twitter space conversations about this, where it's like I start really thinking like, what is creativity, and like it really makes me think a lot more about the kind of the human side of generation, which is really interesting. Um,
Right? That actually, maybe we should just jump right into Dolly too, because I feel like this is where that would be a great place to start. Just because
yes,
I've been kind of obsessed with that lately.
yeah, so I think the for generative deep learning, a lot of people have probably seen generative images before. So like you mentioned a GAN, I've actually done a fair amount of GAN work, and you're right, like that's like a two model approach where you have a discriminator and then a generator, where it kind of the generator actually usually starts out generating static, and then you
Mm,
have a model that's trained on a data set of images to kind of produce, something like faces or a building, and then it will kind of tell the generator what to adjust in its neural network, and then it starts generating output that kind of looks more like those images.
mm.
And then so people have probably seen, if you've been looking at stuff with AI, like NVIDIA and other companies have created GANs that can do amazing things where they generate, really realistic looking faces or humans, where at least if I go look at it, and if you look really hard or something, you can tell a difference. I think they're like pretty realistic looking now, where, you can create a fake person and I wouldn't be able to tell looking at a picture online.
Yeah, they're very impressive now. I feel like because we were talking about this the other day, like 5 years ago when I first got here to Seattle, AI was blowing up, and like data scientist was the hottest job on the market. and nobody even knew what that meant yet. Um, People were experimenting with GANs, and you were seeing things like Google producing these images that were, it was literally like a face made of eyes, or an entire like painting made of the parts of like dogs and things. And it was really bizarre, kind of abstract, like very mathematical looking art, but it started to kind of pique the curiosity that, oh, we could do these really interesting, crazy creative things with AI algorithms. But it's impressive how far we've gotten now, where you can actually synthesize faces. I was looking at one the other day, or I'm sure you've seen it before, where it's basically, it just evolves between different faces and shifts to morph between all kinds of known animals, creatures, faces, whatever. And it does it. It's so impressive because it makes you, it kind of blurs the line between like what is one thing and what is another, like where one sort of face or identity of that creature stops, and then it's now a wolf versus a chihuahua.
Right, like where's the line?
Yeah.
And it makes your brain like wonder.
Yeah. You immediately feel like you're having an acid trip when you see that. I think it's just pointing at some problems that we have, where we really key in on the pattern of a particular organism like that, but like compositionally speaking, or like mathematically, there's not actually that much difference between the structure. And that's like obviously what these algorithms are keying in on.
Yeah, and then so you mentioned Dolly or Dolly and Dolly 2, which is,
Mhm.
to me, that almost feels like the next, like after seeing all the stuff with the GANs coming out for the past
Yeah.
several years, and they've been around for a while, but now they're looking very realistic. OpenAI has their program Dolly, which I think came out a couple of years ago or a few years ago, and then Dolly
Mhm.
2, which came out very recently. And that's a program that can take input as text and then generate images based
Right.
on that text. And it is mind blowing to me seeing some of the results. And I'm still waiting for my Dolly 2 API access so I can start playing
Oh,
around with
God.
it and see where the
I know, I'm
limits
on the
are.
wait list.
But that allows you to kind of type in something. It could be very specific. So like you could actually say like, I want a picture of a dog on the moon eating cereal, and then you could even say like a style
In the
that you want
style
that
of
image in. So like
Van
as
Gogh.
if Van Gogh made it or something, and it'll
Yeah.
generate that image, and it is very impressive.
What's impressive to me about it is that for a long time, all of those, like there's a lot of different steps in that, right? And for a while, those were individual models. And now it seems like we've gotten a lot better at combining together these models into a whole pipeline, where you can say a natural language output and say, I want to see a dog on the moon eating a bowl of cereal painted in the style of Van Gogh. And even a human is just like, what? That's a crazy thing. But it can basically take that. You have some portion of that arrangement of models that is interpreting it from natural language and then converting it into something that can actually be acted upon. And then there is content awareness of like the different objects and things you're talking about. And then there's an image synthesis portion of that model stack that's actually generating the objects and the composition in a way that actually makes sense spatially. It's really impressive.
And I think in the new
Oh, and
ones
the
too,
style GAN portion. That's like literally restyling it too.
right, and that was a separate, like you were saying, these are almost like a combination of all of these things we've seen in the past now coming into
Yeah.
one thing. Because style transfer was a big thing too, right?
Yes,
I
style
can take
transfer.
any image and then make it look like Van Gogh. But
Right.
it understands that. It's very interesting. I know that they used GPT-3. I assume they still do for Dolly 2. I know they did for Dolly 1,
Yeah.
which is like a 12 billion parameter transformer, which is a type of a deep learning model that can understand, like sequence as an input, so you can type in,
Yeah.
what you want.
Which I mean, in its own right, is impressive, because you were seeing people a couple of years ago with GPT-3 when it first came out. I think has it been 2 years now?
Yeah, I think it's been at least 2 years, if not more.
Yeah, because it was right before the pandemic, I think. But you were seeing people like building bots and stuff with it, or like characters in VR. I was watching a video where someone had hooked up a fully rigged character, like an NPC, non-player character in the game, to GPT-3, and was using that. There was no script for that character. It would just wait for somebody to come up to it and talk to it through the mic, and then it would come up with a response, and it was all based on GPT-3's model
Yeah,
and corpus.
seeing like the conversations and stuff that people have with it is really cool. Obviously it's
Yeah,
not 100% natural all the time, and there's stuff maybe that it struggles a little bit with, but it's really it's a really cool time to
yeah.
be in the field and see all this stuff happening. And like you talked about conversations, but also there's the big use case around I'm blanking on what it was
Is
called.
it
I think
Codex?
yeah, there's two versions. I know like GitHub had one, and I think OpenAI
Yeah,
made
where they're
one. And
actually like coding with it or creating code based off of the entire open source library of GitHub.
yeah, so you can actually now have AI kind of program for you, and there's a lot of interesting use cases of like actually saying what you want and it generates it. And then I think
Mhm.
the GitHub version, I think they both use GPT-3 on the back end. The GitHub version, I think, is the one that kind of generates code based on like function names or helps you program, which is really cool because like
Yeah,
just like having a typing assistant in
it's like you've got
Gmail.
a pair programmer with you, but it's your AI assistant.
Yeah, so that's
It's
like
not quite that
that's a
embodied
really
yet.
cool use case that's
Yeah.
actually just like directly affecting the industry that it's coming from, which is really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's like that Ray Kurzweil example of like oh my gosh, the singularity where the tech builds itself better so that it can build more tech faster, and it just becomes a
Yeah.
flywheel.
We're starting
Yeah,
we're starting to live in a sci-fi novel, I think.
yeah. I mean, I've been feeling like that for a long time. That we're just in this crazy time where there's just so much happening. Like I always think of the example of where if you think back to like agricultural, like pre-agricultural times where we were just nomadic, people in a tribe, like their grandparents had done the same thing that they were doing 2 generations later. Like not much changed. So you could actually relate directly to your grandparents. Whereas now you can't relate to people who are 5 years younger than you or 10 years younger than you because they're like an entirely different generation or TikTok came out and now you can't relate
That's true. I don't understand a lot of the TikTok trends.
Yeah. So
So these are like really cool programs that are doing amazing things. What are some of like the cool? We talked about like the programming one and conversation a little bit. Like,
mm,
what are some cool applications you've seen or that you're hoping to see these in? So like the image generation and like this conversational
yeah.
aspect.
Yeah. This is why Dolly 2 and whatever future iterations they come out with seems so transformative because I was watching a video the other day of someone literally they had taken it or they're using it in their Photoshop workflow. So they were basically generating assets or asking it to generate assets that you would normally have to go on Google and search for a particular thing that already exists. So you hope that it's out there somewhere on the web or some stock photo library has it. And instead, he was just talking to GPT-3 or Dolly 2 and saying, I need this particular thing as like a minimal, hand drawn piece. And then he was making a stop motion film with all these 2D assets in Photoshop. And he was like, this was 100 times faster than it normally takes to put something like this together, at least, because he can just literally make up whatever's coming out of his head. And so that's like all of the different ways that you can think to take an AI model or a combination of models that can literally just translate the thought or the idea from your mind directly into a physical medium or a two-dimensional image, and then use that to work on whatever you're doing. It's like that just opens up, it just gets all these different barriers out of the way where you have to normally have an extremely knowledgeable skill set in Photoshop or be able to, when this eventually extends to like videos, because it will. We're doing single frames right now, but you just need more frames for a video. So we're going to start saying, I want to see a video of with these things happening, and it's going to be in this particular anime style. And people are basically just going to start. It's like TikTok now. It just makes the tools really easy to produce quick videos, but you just think about when you have something like this or these kinds of AI assisted tools to just generate things that you think of as they come to your mind. it's like shortening that gap between your brain and the idea actually manifesting.
Yeah, that's it feels like such a big step as a creation tool. Like
Yeah,
where, when we've had that like Photoshop and all this stuff comes around where it makes it easier to do all these things, which is incredible. And then this almost feels like it's just going to be the next iteration of that where you can, talk to something or describe something with text or
mm,
like click a few buttons around something on an image and we'll understand what you want and generate it. And
yeah.
like you
The
mentioned
thing
doing
that
this
the,
in
the way that I heard it put the other day is like you're really what Dolly 2 right now is immediately helping is moving us into this era where if you're an artist, you're not focused anymore so much on generating. You don't have to be focused so much on generating the entire thing from scratch. You just get an AI to do a lot of the work of getting close to something, and then you're more figuring out how to tune your results and then correct where it didn't do it just right to what you had in mind.
Right. It creates a really good foundation for the work that you're doing, even if it doesn't get you 100% of the way there.
Yeah,
You can go in and correct it. That's really cool. Yeah.
yeah.
That's very exciting. You mentioned doing the sequence of frames. I'm really excited to see that as the next step.
Oh
Of like,
yeah.
I've already seen
You like
people using
animations?
I've
That'd
already
be
seen
so
people
cool.
using Dolly 2 to like generate music videos just on single frames and then tying them together. But
Oh
I'd
wow.
love to see it like understand the context of a character and animation all throughout or something. It's gonna be really cool.
Yeah, this is so. We're on 2D images right now, right? Because that's kind of like the easier place to start 'cause it's a single frame, or just generate 100 variations on this frame. Video is obviously a lot more information because you're dealing with 30 or 60 frames per second or whatever your requirements there are, and a lot of them are redundant, and there needs to be like sensical movement over time. Have you seen you've seen those videos where where Google was experimenting a few years back where they would basically just try to generate every frame following the set of frames that were given to the model, and you would see some sort of crazy like monstrous morphing baby face that would turn into a weird snake.
Yeah.
So like they take, we've been doing that kind of thing for a while, but we're obviously getting better at building up like context or maybe knowledge of some sort within these models. So we'll get better at that over time. The thing that's actually really exciting me now is just translating all of that knowledge and figuring out how to bridge the gap from like 2D mediums like photos and videos to 3 dimensions, because there are a lot of challenges inherent in generating 3 dimensional content. And it's not just in adding a third dimension to the 2D content, but it's also in the fact that when we start talking about 3D stuff, it's more about how is it being used, because it's not just being looked at. It becomes far more interactive, right?
Right. Yeah. Let's dive into that because we so far the stuff we've been talking about GANs and Dolly, at least
Mhm.
from what I've seen, I think might be a 3D version of GANs or something. But with Dolly and stuff, so far I've only seen 2 dimensions. I'm sure
Yeah,
3D is coming at some point. But let's talk about the 3D generation because I know that's what you're doing a lot of work on right now, and it's really exciting.
yeah.
And one of the most popular algorithms right now is called a NeRF or some variation of that, which is neural radiant field, I think.
Neural radiance fields. Yeah.
So let's dive into a little bit about, at a high level at least, like how those work and what they do and how they could be used.
Yeah. Yeah, so at a high level, neural radiance fields, from my understanding, and to be clear, I am not the one literally writing models, but I'm working with an entire team with AI engineers and developers and modelers and all kinds of people because I'm a product manager an interaction designer at Curie. Um, but we're like a 10-person team, so we're super small. We do everything. But NeRFs from a high level, basically you are able to record a space. So if you're using a traditional camera to record a 2 dimensional shot from a particular angle, and so you get this nice frame. If this was a camera that was actually recording a NeRF, it would actually intuit, essentially by doing some form of kind of casting vectors through the scene to estimate the depth of different things in this scene. And I think there's a lot of other algorithms or models that will produce a depth map as well, but it's sort of creating a 2 dimension or a 3 dimensional point cloud almost, that it then estimates and tries to extrapolate like a certain amount of angle from that image. And they're getting really good. The main challenge right now seems to be, are you using a video camera to do this? Because then you've got hundreds or thousands of frames coming in pretty quickly to be able to base all of that information off of. And if you just think about it from a human perspective, if you're looking at something from one angle, how easy would it be for you to assume what's on the other side of it, or like what's around the edges that you can't perfectly see around? Like how easy would it be for you to render that entire object just from that one perspective? So these models, or NeRFs, are basically trying to solve that problem in a way and estimate the occluded or hidden surfaces and content in a space.
That's awesome. Really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but it's crazy because, like, I think a good example is to think of like a Tesla. So one of these cars driving around with like 19 different sensors, LiDAR, radar, and all kinds of different cameras that are recording in every direction. They're able to seam together. If you ever sat in a Tesla before, you can do this top-down camera mode where it literally looks like there's a drone hovering above the car, looking top-down on it. But it's a real-time sort of composited photo or live stream of the car, essentially. But those cars are also building a 3D representation of the environment around them. I don't know if they currently use NeRFs, but that kind of technology would be extremely helpful, and probably is being used in some capacity in that space, to literally just map out the three-dimensional space as they move through it using these 2D cameras, as well as their LiDAR and other sensors.
Yeah, that's a really fun use case, because a lot of the stuff I see right now is like generating a 3D kind of asset. Like,
Mhm.
like if you have a toy tractor is one of the common ones you see in like the data sets for these, and you generate a 3-dimensional view around it, so you can do that. But the other side of that, of generating a whole scene and doing it so that if you're a robot or a self-driving car that you can navigate, that's super interesting. And like some of them, like Teslas, for example, I could be wrong. As far as I remember, it's like at least they're camera first, so they're not using a lot of the other sensors as much. So having just cameras, if you can actually build a depth map just as good or better than having other sensors like LiDAR, that's super amazing.
Right. Which I think we're getting better at building algorithms that can do something closer to a human brain, at least in like perceiving the depth in real time. But it's also doing something more in a way, because it's actually generating like a full sort of recording of the scene. The crazy thing that I'm thinking about now is like, if you're this always makes you think about, like, if you just think about all those different cars driving around all over the world, as there's more and more, and you've got, I don't know, thousands of them that are circling through the streets and whatnot in San Francisco. They're basically capable in some capacity of creating like a real-time 3-dimensional live stream of the city. Everything that those cameras can see, they're just recording and estimating all of the surfaces and shapes, and basically building a 3-dimensional mock-up in real time of all the people moving around in that entire city. And then if you add people's phones, because there's going to be iPhones coming out that can do some of this soon and have NeRFs built in, and you're walking around through like a Starbucks or something and pointing your phone at things, you're literally kind of recording and updating the 3D stream of that space. It's like we're building a digital twin of the Earth, basically.
Yeah, and because like I think iPhones now have a LiDAR on them as well, right? So they can actually get depths in, not just the image, but also use depth for mapping, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah, probably make that even more accurate. But so we've got all these different kinds of models right now, like computer vision models that can look into a scene or a particular image and like recognize things in that scene, right? Like you've done a ton of work in that space at your previous company as well. So if we're thinking about just having the resource of these 3-dimensional representations of scenes, and then we can use even just existing models to, take the current 2-dimensional video stream from a phone and say, what is in this scene right now? I'm in a Starbucks, and now I'm like looking at a bottle of some sort of branded, Chobani yogurt over there, or there's like a little pastry or something that is part of Starbucks catalog. And it can actually recognize those because it's something that Starbucks has set up. They've cataloged all their items in their shop. to be recognized by some sort of algorithm. Now you can literally just have people's phones going around and doing what like an Amazon Go store does by having cameras everywhere. But the phone is really the thing that you need now. It's just your device looking around saying, I want to get that thing, I'll grab it. And then like eventually you can get rid of the person that actually has to check out your card and everything. It's just like a transaction.
That anything that lowers me waiting in line, I'm pretty excited about. But with that, let's dive into. So like you're doing a lot of this, like the stuff that we're talking about at Curie. Could you give us a little bit like of a background or kind of what Curie is doing and yeah, well, let's start with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me take a sip of tea first. Okay, so Curie's whole spiel at the highest level, and then we can dig down a little bit more into that, is just right now we are helping companies, retailers, e-commerce stores, just think about all of these different things that we have images of on the internet. Because that could be every single product on Amazon. That could be some sort of Nike shoe on their online store. And you have this problem of wanting to be able to see those things or maybe interact with them more, but a lot of people aren't really comfortable with going out to like retail stores anymore, and COVID's just kind of changed the entire landscape of what it means to shop and the mall experience and all of that. So Curie is really trying to help all of those different products get from a 2D online format into a 3D form that can be used in augmented reality, like via your phone, so that you can kind of do like a virtual sort of showroom experience, or into different platforms, games, and experiences that are kind of built into the whole metaverse ecosystem. So that's where it sort of like it transitions from just being like traditional e-commerce and stores online to actually helping them find new markets in all of these emerging domains and worlds, experiences like Horizons, Meta, or Roblox. I had over the last few years, Roblox really like blew up in a way that I had no idea until more recently. But now people are doing everything from playing Minecraft clone stuff to like doing entire custom world builds and like shopping and social experiences. I think somebody bought a Gucci bag on Roblox for like $10,000, and it's literally just a digital version of the bag. They don't own the real one.
like some NFT stuff.
Yeah. Oh god.
Which I'm sure is going to be coming more as like these virtual worlds. Like that's not even really VR. That's just a digital world. I mean, people will remember, what was it, Second Life, where it was kind of similar, right? Where you could buy, I think it was property and stuff in there, and that was like, that's the earliest. I'm sure there's stuff before it, but like that was like, oh, there's a Second Life or Second World, whatever it's called, where you can like buy something and people would actually pay a fair amount of money for it.
Right. I think, the more I've been thinking about the whole like NFT space in this regard, we have to get over this idea that that because something is digital, it's not worth as much, because it's really just how people are using it, or like the utility that they're getting out of the thing. And the problem right now one of the problems we are trying to solve right now is we're helping people take 2D content and turn it into a 3D thing. So like you have an image of that thing, of that product, and you want to convert it into a 3D model that can be used. Right now, that's done in like a one-off style for the most part. If you're Amazon and you're trying to create thousands of these product models, you'll go to a traditional agency, you'll hire a bunch of artists, overseas. And there's all kinds of different ways that you can go about doing that, and you'll have to deal with all of the logistics of like coordinating and planning all of these different products to be made. And then you also have to then figure out how to coordinate and make sure that you're actually getting something that is useful at the end of that. Because if you've ever had any experience in 3D modeling, animation, that domain is very tricky. There's like all these different kinds of file formats just at the baseline. And then you just have all different kinds of rendering problems when it comes to showing a 3D object, depending on where it's being viewed. There's a reason why the game industry for thus far has really focused on just building monolithic experiences. Like World of Warcraft, but most World of Warcraft stuff does not easily translate into Grand Theft Auto 5. There's like a very technical process involved in trying to grab assets from one and bring them into another. So they kind of end up being these isolated walled gardens by necessity. But it's what we're kind of looking at now is like if websites were sort of the locations of the 2D internet, the metaverse, or like the emerging sort of 3D internet, the internet spatialized. Really, locations can be somewhere in a virtual space. They could be the entire virtual world itself, but they could also be in real space. It could literally be the location of this object in a store in your physically located or geolocated point on the map. So it's like that thing is a link. That object on a shelf is actually a link that can point to any number of other things. So when I go and pick up that bottle off of a shelf in a grocery store, if it has a virtual twin that knows that I grabbed it, I can actually go and pull up a bunch of other information. I can that can like link me to a whole different experience. It could be like a game in, I don't know, a virtual, like a mock-up of like a GameStop, if that was still a thing. If you could literally go into GameStop, if that was still a thing, and pick up a game off the shelf, and then immediately jump into like a virtual sort of lobby space for it, where you could start talking to people about it and hanging out. Like, there's all kinds of different forms of this emerging that I cannot even imagine right now. But it's really what we are part of the core problem of, is trying to take 2D stuff and make it part of this emerging 3D medium and actually have use, meaning that you can operate it between different platforms, different spaces, and it's compatible across those.
Interesting.
It's a huge problem.
And you mentioned GameStop. If it was still GameStop's still there, and they're getting into NFTs and stuff. So if they need help generating their 3D assets, you should contact them. And just to like kind of reiterate a little bit about like the Curie process, just like you're kind of building a more efficient pipeline of generating 3D assets, and you can do that easily using a 2D asset. Like we've talked about 3D scene generation off 2D images, where you only take a handful of images. I know it can vary depending on product and stuff like that. And like, I remember a time not so long ago, creating a 3D asset with cameras. You had to go somewhere with like I forget what it's called, like, but they had the giant array of cameras, like a whole circle or a half circle, and you could do like a whole scan, and it took all these images and
it's like photogrammetry studio.
Yeah, and like
there's like 100 DSLR cameras in a circle.
Exactly, it looked really expensive. And I think rendering it took quite a bit of time. And I was gonna say, like, you had to go to that location for it, because you couldn't just bring that camera array everywhere. So this is like a really cool way too of like, if you have a warehouse of stuff, potentially, you can at least start the generation process like in that location, which is
right.
Cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think the fundamental shift that's happening, that's like being validated by data now, and like the markets are starting to become aware of, and general like retailers across the market are becoming aware of, is that 3D is a thing now. People are interested in it. It is primarily being driven by the the generation that has really adopted like TikTok and Snapchat. But they're growing, and they're going to continue to become a primary market for all of these different products. So they're figuring out, crap, I need to take these images aren't enough. I need to at least have like a 3D view of my thing, or like an AR view, even better. They can like drop it on their table in front of them. So they're trying to solve that problem. And right now, for the most part, if you want to do that, you have to literally take that product that you have, and maybe it's huge, could be like a piece of furniture or a bed, and you have to send it somewhere for them to do a photogrammetry model, or to do really high-end, photos of it to like at a photography studio, if you just want to stick with the 2D format. Or you go and hire an agency to literally make that model for you, and it usually costs like thousands of dollars to do something like that. So we're trying to kind of consolidate all of these different issues that go along with converting products into a 3D twin. and making it available everywhere. So just to simplify this down, the things that people do with Curie is basically we take the 2D images from your site. So like if you're Cultivizina, they're one of our customers right now. They're like the largest sword retailer in the United States. So they're just this huge network of blacksmiths that all sell their various kinds of collectibles through that site. But you can go on there and get a particular item, a particular page, and just give that to us, and we essentially take and scrape the images from that site. We pass it through a machine learning model that generates a 3D, like a rough model off of those images. And then we use human talent to further polish it because right now we're not at the point where, like, nobody is at the point where they can generate a perfect 3D model from like 1, 2, 3 images. And it's going to be a long time before it's 100% AI, but we do like half of the work right now with a 3D model generator. And then we have artists polish up the rest. And what that does it saves a ton of time from just the logistical problems of working with agencies and artists in the traditional means. You just give us a link to the product, and then we essentially digest that and give you back a model. So like that's one part of it. The other side, because that is actually becoming easier over time. Like over the next 5 years, 10 years, most devices are going to be like very capable. Like we were just talking about, like the iPhone is going to have NeRFs built in and LiDAR already. So like be very easy to just use your phone to scan an object. But then what do you do with it? Well, Curie's whole thing is not just taking the 2D object to a 3D format. It's then taking that 3D model and making it available from an API. So I can literally just embed that model onto a web page on an existing site. So it's immediately useful for someone that just has a traditional, retail store online. And I can open it up in AR from that embed. But also I can load it into a Unity environment, like a game engine, and be able to pull it into any of these different experiences that use Unity. We're also building support for Unreal and some of the other platforms as well. So basically just expanding out coverage to make it so that you can just call this model, this product, from an API and have it appear in whatever space that you want it, which is really cool because if you just think about all of that same problem we were talking about of these monolithic ecosystems, or like a world where all of the objects that go into that game are part of a massive downloadable file that you have to get like 100 gigs onto your computer to load all of that stuff in. If you have like a VR world where you are literally going through a whole showroom or a gallery, or maybe it's just your virtual house, and you've got all of these things that you have acquired over the years, maybe just like your wine bottle collection, and you've got friends over, you could literally have all of these different wine bottles that are not stored on any particular game world. They're just being loaded in from that API. And that then allows us to sort of track individual objects as you would that embed. So as like a retailer, I can then say, oh, this many people have like looked at that bottle and interacted with it over the past month in various different kinds of virtual settings or on websites.
That's really cool. So like you're saying, you generate the assets, but also host them in a way that they can be pulled into multiple places. Kind of, and
Yeah.
they kind of have the same ID. So like if you had a virtual bottle of wine, for example, and you could, I don't post it that you own it on your website or something, but also literally have it in your VR house at the same time. And
Yep.
and being able to pull something from an API like that is awesome. Like you literally do the entire pipeline essentially.
Yeah.
Which is really
Yeah.
cool.
It's the 2D to 3D delivery pipeline. Basically, we're like a content delivery network for 3D content.
Awesome. And I just want to check because I think we were a little over the time
Oh,
that
yeah, we're
we
at
originally
11:15.
booked. Just want to make sure you're good on time. And I know I at least have one other question and want to hear about where I can find out, or where people listening can find out more about Curie. But just want to double check your time.
Yeah, I've got another 10 minutes or so
Cool.
if we need it.
So first, before we jump in, if anyone in the audience wants to ask a question, go ahead and do so in the chat or in Slack, and I'll try to find it. And then I had one thing I want to ask real quick, because like in the messaging, people talk about generating these assets for the metaverse. How
Mhm.
would you define the metaverse, and what is that? Because I even like just seeing all these 3D assets now everywhere. Like I saw
Uh,
3D furniture in a Twitter ad the other day. Like it's really all
yeah,
this stuff of like being able to interact with things. It's really going everywhere, and not just in like a headset.
yeah. That was the first time we'd seen that as well. Like Twitter actually just added support for 3D ads on their platform, so that wasn't Walmart in particular. It's just a new format that they're supporting now as a platform. But yeah, that was cool. They basically you could see in one of the posts that they had like three different products from the Walmart catalog, and they were furniture in this particular case, or like a KitchenAid mixer or something like that. And you could just pull them up. They weren't AR compatible in this particular case, but you could pull it up and like, poke around at the model and whatnot. So that was pretty cool. But the metaverse question always there's so much confusion around this. I think in part just because Meta like slapped this down on the table in front of everybody and said, "Hey, this is what we're doing," and everyone now associates Meta or any particular other competitor of them to be building the metaverse or building their metaverse. And I think the easiest, like simplest way to think about it is just that the metaverse is the spatial version of the internet. It's not even separate from the internet. It's just an extension of it into three-dimensional space of the real world. So through augmented and mixed reality and virtual spaces like Roblox or Fortnite or like Meta Horizons. Their particular island in the metaverse. It's like we used to call the internet like cyberspace, and that was just nobody was building their own cyberspace. You were building a website on the internet. So now you're building a platform in the metaverse. It's a whole ecosystem.
Awesome. I think that's a great way of looking at it. Like that's kind of how I like to think of it. I think too.
Yeah,
Um,
I just feel like it's confusing otherwise if like you tell people that you're building your own metaverse, but it's like it's part of it's where everybody is technically like contributing to it, so we're all building it.
I saw someone ask a question if they're still here. They asked about, can you convert a photo of a person into a 3D model?
Yes,
They
we
specifically
actually
were wondering about the face.
yeah, we've actually done that. It takes more work. Like for the more complex a model is, the more work it takes from the the AI and the human polishing perspective. But I mean, that's also the same case when you're talking about a human building that model,
Yeah.
like building a very articulated and detailed character or a photorealistic model of a person. Like one of our friends did that a few years ago. He had taken one of those photogrammetry studios, surrounded himself with like 180 DSLR cameras, and like basically Photoshop or photographed every surface and freckle on his body, and then made a model and just open sourced it.
Yeah, I remember because
um,
then there was like a party where it was like hundreds of him or something like that.
yeah, that's right.
Uh,
Literally.
another good question. Someone asked, "What's your favorite resource to learn about the metaverse?" So I guess probably like VR. You could tie in
Ooh,
whatever you want to define that to be.
yeah. Oh gosh. Well, okay. So there is a really good Medium article. I think it is seven. It's like seven tenets or core pillars of the metaverse. Basically, like defines this pretty well. Um, I'll have to find a link to that. Maybe we can put it in the show notes afterwards. Um, but that would be one good place to start, just to like think of it from like a principles perspective of like what is it. But that's completely separate matter from like what's going on in this space right now. Honestly, the best place that I can think of to go to find out just like what's happening in this space of like XR and development of experiences that are sort of plugging into this metaverse ecosystem is Twitter. There are so many people on this platform that are sharing the work that they're doing. There's also a really cool space that Twitter Spaces, sort of like conversation area that I go to pretty often. That is, it's called Zen Space, but he might be a little bit hard to find. Basically, find some lists that listen to and follow people that are talking about VR, AR, the metaverse, and XR as like a blanket term of all of these technologies. And there is just a wealth of information there.
Yeah, I was gonna also say Twitter was gonna be
Yeah.
my answer too. Like, obviously, there's great articles and probably good like Udemy courses and stuff or whatever if you're looking for more like a hands-on of like building something in Unity.
Yeah, like if it's
But for
project based, that's where I would go. Is like
right, but for
Udemy.
for understanding like what's going on in the space and what people are building and what new technology can do, I've also found Twitter to be really good. And the Twitter Spaces feature that Jay mentioned is a new feature where it's an audio only kind of conversation and kind of like a podcast, but you can bring up multiple people in
Yeah,
as speakers,
it's like
and it's really
Clubhouse too.
cool. Yeah. I'll try to find that space because I go to it as well, and I'll link it in the show notes after as well.
Yeah.
And then I know we're almost up on time, so I just really want to thank you
Yeah,
for
absolutely. This
coming
was a
on
lot of fun.
and being on our first event of 2022. I'm excited to do a whole bunch of more of these. So if anyone else wants to come on, let me know. And then before you go, definitely tell us more about like where people could follow you, find what you're working on, and learn more about what you're doing at Curie or learn more about Curie in general.
Yeah, and of course, goes without saying, show notes for all of this stuff too. But so Curie, you can find out more about us on at Curie.co, and it's spelled Qurie.co.
It's C,
So,
C, I think, right? Not a Q.
or, wow,
It is.
yes,
The link is in the
CU.
show note right now. If you go to the description, it is in there.
CU, yes, like curious, or like Madame Curie. Wow, Q. I don't know where that came from. Yeah, so you can find out more about us there. We are in the process of building up a little bit more of a sort of online and social media presence. I'm going to be heading that up. So you'll probably see more of me if you start digging around more. But that would be a good place to start. As far as like my own stuff outside of Curie, I've run a podcast before called Reality Quest that I co-hosted with Kelly Campelia. So you might be able to find her on Twitter as well. But that is in my feed, and usually I have something posted in or pinned on my Twitter profile as well, which is at J Silvas or Jay Silvas Silvas. Also, I have a Substack, like a blog. I'm going to be picking that back up soon, and that's Mindwoosh at Substack .substack.
And we can update the description on the recording with all those things. So if you're listening to this after the broadcast ends and you're listening to the recording, everything should be in the description.
Yeah, I'm confused by all my butchering of spelling.
we'll spell everything correctly and put the right URLs in the recording, so don't worry.
Yeah, no, Sage, this was a lot of fun. I'm really excited to be helping kick this off. So.
Yeah, thank you so much. And with that, I think we're going to go ahead and end the broadcast. Thank you, everyone, for attending and the good questions. And again, really thank you to Jay. I'm excited to see more, excited to see the stuff Curie's working on, and hopefully have you back on sometime soon.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Thanks,
all right, everyone. Have a good day.